Now it's fine. So, what I'm going to talk about today is insanity. Yep, insanity. Not a pleasant subject to talk about, but we need to talk about it. Why? Because the pharmaceutical companies are making a load of money from people unnecessarily. And I say that to you because of my experience in working with people who have issues of substance abuse and mental health. It's probably not a person listening to this video who has not heard of a 12-step program. One of those programs might be Alcoholics Anonymous, another one might be Narcotics Anonymous, and there's Overeaters Anonymous and Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous that do have just 12-step programs all over the place. If you look at these programs really carefully, what you will find is they all have something in common. And what they have in common is a second step. The first step usually deals with the issue of abuse, such as alcohol, or eating, or sex, or relationships. But the second step in every one of these programs has to do with insanity. Millions of people have gone through these programs, and recovered. Millions. But very few of them have been willing to admit that the real issue was not substance, it was not the alcohol, it was the insanity. Now, one of the requirements, or one of the things that we do in these 12-step programs is we take our personal inventory. If you take your personal inventory, if you go all the way back to your earliest memories in childhood, what you will find is that most people who drink, who overeat, who use narcotics or any other substance, most of them had some problems during their childhood years. Very few of us had perfect childhoods. Well, and some of us may say, well, my childhood was pretty normal. Well, let's talk about it. Because most of the time when I've heard people say, my childhood was really normal, they will start talking and talk about being beat, being abandoned. I remember a guy was telling me about his childhood, and I said, well, that's amazing to me that you had such wonderful parents. You grew up in such a happy home, and here you are now with a police record, and it just can't seem to stay out of trouble. What's the problem? He said, well, there is no problem. I said, it's got to be something. Finally, he talked about his mother and his stepdad. I said, oh, stepdad, so where was your father? He said, I did not meet my father until I went to prison. He said, I was sleeping on the top bunk, and my father was sleeping on the bottom bunk. And that's how I got to know my father. Oh, I see. What was your father in prison for? He said, my father was in prison for murdering his girlfriend. Okay. The funniest thing about it was when he told me who his father was, I actually knew his father. I actually grew up with the girl that the father had murdered. But that's beside the point. The point is that this child had some issues from way back because his father was in prison. Okay, now I don't know all the details of it, but what I'm saying to you is rarely have I seen a person describe a perfect childhood. When you reach back, a lot of times you may have been very, very uncomfortable as a child. Maybe you were shy, or maybe you were the person that always wanted to be liked, or always needed approval. Or maybe you were the child that just felt like you didn't fit in, you didn't belong. You know, now we're testing children, or at least we say we are. And a lot of these children that are having these uncomfortable thoughts and uncomfortable feelings are being put on medication. You know, a lot of ADHD is being medicated. Now, I love that acronym ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. The first thing I think about, without having any education on the subject at all, is when there's a deficit about anything, you seek to replace. If you go to a doctor and he says to you, well, you know, you have a potassium deficit, your body is deficient of potassium. Well, very likely he's going to say, well, you know, you need to change your diet, maybe add in bananas, and we're going to put you on some vitamins for a while till we get your levels up. And he would tell you why potassium is important and how some of the things, you know, the uncomfortable feelings you might be having may be a result of this potassium disorder. And every deficiency that you have, if you have a home and it is deficient of water, you need to have your water supply increased. When a child has attention deficit, maybe you need to look at the parents and say, well, you need to pay that child more attention. Now, I know that there are people in the psychiatric community and the medical community that will look at me and say, no, Nelson, you got that all twisted. No, I don't. No, I don't. If you find a child who has ADHD, look in the home, look at the parents. Is there a missing parent in the house? Has the father run away? Has the mother run away? Is the child being cared for by grandparents who are really too old or too busy to take care of that child? Before we medicate these children, we really need to look at root cause. What is causing this deficit of attention? Are the two parents both working full-time jobs, and maybe one is working a full-time job and going to school, and the other one is working a full-time job and a part-time job? What is the real issue here? You know, maybe when you walk into the home, there's a brand new house, and a child has toys all over the place and all kinds of electrical, electronic devices and games and whatnot. And because this child is living better than his parents ever lived, best food, best clothes, why should the child complain? And don't we judge people's environment by the outside things? But this child is acting out. He's showing signs of hyperactivity. Could it be that hyperactivity is a cry for attention? Are the parents willing to slow down and give the child attention? Probably not. So what we do is we medicate this child. And that's a very, very early age to start medicating. And what the message was sending is, you know what? When something is wrong, there's a pill for that. I lived in a senior home for about 3 years. The requirement you had to be over 62. And there were people that just sat in the lobby, and no matter what happened, they would say, you know what? There's a pill for that. If they saw somebody angry, there's a pill for that. If they saw somebody depressed, there's a pill for that, sweetie. And if they were in pain, of course, there was a pill for that. Well, my doctor said, and my doctor gave me thus and so. And the next thing you know, everybody's on pills. What if there is a solution? What if there is a solution that basically is a spiritual solution? Much of what is wrong with us is lack of spirit. We have a spiritual malady that requires a spiritual solution. Are you willing to take the chance to look at the fact that it may be spiritual? Think about something. After the Vietnam War, a lot of soldiers came home and they were damaged and they were wounded. Some physically damaged, some physically wounded, but a lot were mentally, emotionally, psychologically wounded people. And they got a diagnosis of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But did anybody ever take the time to look at these people and what were they like before they went in the military? Now, there are veterans that are going to look at this and say, oh man, now he's way off. Well, let me tell you something. In the last few years, the number of veterans committing suicide is just phenomenal. And many of these veterans have a PTSD diagnosis. Many of these veterans, most if not all of these veterans, are being treated at the VA hospital, and they have psychiatrists, and they have case managers and psychologists and social workers and therapists, and they have pills, they have medication, and yet they commit suicide. Well, a recent study found something very interesting. Many of these soldiers who were diagnosed PTSD had never left the United States. And many of these soldiers had never been in a war zone. Those who left to go to war had served in capacities where they had no physical contact, no trauma, so to speak, other than just being in the military. So, what is the root cause of this PTSD? Is it war, the atrocities of war? Or is it something deeper than that? Are we willing to go all the way back and look at root cause? Because that same soldier who's being diagnosed as PTSD may be that same little child that's being diagnosed as ADHD. When the underlying problem has to do with root cause. What is the root cause? Well, when I worked in mental health facilities, I said to a psychiatrist one time, I noticed that many of the men and women who come in here have been molested, they've been sexually abused, they've been abandoned, they've had all kinds of atrocities in their childhood. But yet we never look at it. Why? He said, we don't have time. We do not have time. A lot of, when I first worked in the field, it was not unusual for a person to come in and have 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and sometimes 120 days coverage on their insurance. And many treatment facilities were 30-day treatments. Some would say 28 days. 28-day programs, 56-day programs, and up to 90-day programs. And a lot of times to pay for insurance. But routinely, 30 days was, and then the insurance company started saying, but wait a minute, this is not working. The same people that go in for these 30-day treatments come right back 6 months later, or 3 months later, 4 months later, right back. So we're paying for all this treatment that's obviously not working. And how many times do we see movie stars and rock stars and big people, big politicians, and they go in for treatment? Oh, so-and-so is going to rehab. And the next thing you know, they relapse. Oh, he's back in rehab. And they relapse. Oh, well, she went to rehab. And they commit suicide. Or they die mysteriously. Why? I say the reason is we're not paying attention to root cause. Let's go all the way back. Well, like the psychiatrist said, we don't have time. Well, what if you don't need the psychiatrist to take time? What if you don't need the psychologist or the therapist to take time? What if you could do it yourself? When we walk into AA or NA or any of the 12-step program, we walk in there alone. We don't walk in there with a therapist or a psychiatrist. It's called self-help. What if we could do the same thing for mental illness? You know, I'm going to tell you a secret. In the big book, 12 and 12, and AA literature, and I can't tell you the page and the number, I'm not that familiar, but I will tell you this. It says many of us are willing to admit that we're alcoholic, problem drinkers and alcoholics, but few of us are willing to admit that we're in fact mentally ill. We're not willing to admit that we're mentally ill. Oh no, I'm not. I got a drinking problem. I'm not mentally ill. But yet we have a second step that talks about being restored to sanity. And so many people will tell you, well, when I stopped drinking and I stopped putting drugs in my system, I was restored to my right mind. Well, what if you didn't have your right mind before you started drinking? What if your right mind was warped as a child? What if there are root cause things that had warped your mind long before you picked up the drink or the drug, and the drink or the drug was in fact your medication? Alcoholics Anonymous is probably one of the most wonderful programs ever founded by mankind. And millions of people have gone through that program, and many 12-step programs have been spawned from Alcoholics Anonymous. And yet, it is about to be destroyed. Alcoholics Anonymous is about to be destroyed. And I'd always heard if Alcoholics Anonymous were ever destroyed, it would be an inside job. And you know what the inside job is? Insanity. I heard a lady say the other day, I came into AA and I did what I was supposed to do. I got a sponsor and I worked the 12 steps and I did a 4th step and I did service work and I went to meetings and then I sponsored people and I had to get medication. Really? I don't know if you heard what I heard, but what I heard was I, me. I, me. I, me. She has an I, me program. The second step, when it talks about insanity, talks about a power greater than yourself. And immediately after the second step comes a third step, which talks about God. In that scenario that she mentioned about all these things that she had done, and yeah, she did some of the right things, she never once mentioned God. She never once mentioned God. I had another person come up to me and say, you know, you're not a doctor. I'm not. And I heard a person in AA tell another person to stop taking their medication, and that person committed suicide. Newsflash. If the medication that you're taking restored you to sanity, you would not kill yourself. Sane people do not commit suicide. If a person stopped taking their medication, they stopped taking it because it was not working. I am powerless over alcohol. I am powerless over drugs. I am powerless over people, places, and things, and I'm powerless over pills. I cannot say or do anything that will make you stop drinking, and I cannot say or do anything that will make you start drinking. And I could run right down the line, but I'm going to get right to the point. I cannot make you take pills, and I cannot make you stop taking pills. As a matter of fact, if anyone is listening to this video now and is thinking about not taking your pills, please pick up the phone and call your doctor. The doctor put you on those pills, and the doctor should be responsible for getting you off those pills if you're going to get off of them. Don't get off those pills on your own. The same medication that will heal you will also kill you. Now, let's get back to the I me lady. I did everything I was supposed to do. Did you admit that you were insane? That you were in fact mentally ill? And did you ask God to restore you to sanity? I don't think you did. If you did, you never mentioned it. See, another lady came up to me and she said, you know, Nelson, everybody that walks into AA or other 12-step programs is not mentally ill. I said, really? She said, no. I said, then are they doing a 12-step program? Because, you know, if you're doing a 12-step program and you drop that second step, and you drop that second step, if you're doing a 12-step program and you drop that second step, you're doing an 11-step program. I just want to let you know that if you drop that second step, you're not doing a 12-step program. You're doing an 11-step program. Anybody who's listened to this video, I just want to let you know something. If you're doing a 12-step program and you drop step 2 or confuse step 2 with the, oh, this is a common to believe step. No, it's the insanity step. It's common to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity. If you're not insane and mentally ill, you don't need the second step. And that's a fallacy that most people make when they're working 12-step programs. They refuse to admit that they are in fact insane. They're mentally ill. And I'm sure that there are people watching this video right now who have worked the 12 steps, who have stayed sober for 10, 15, and 20 years, and they will tell you to know not one, I am not insane. But what I would tell you is this: I have a sobriety date, and I have a sanity date. I didn't drink for 20 years before I was restored to sanity, and I lived what I felt was a relatively normal life, and I was happy. But I would say this: sanity trumps sobriety. If you are a 12-step person and you have never asked God to restore you to sanity, I'm going to make a suggestion to you. See, one of the things that I know for sure is that many of us have that uneasy feeling that something is not right. Something is. You know, something is not right. Many of us have that uneasy feeling that something is not right. We have it as children. We have it in high school. That something is not right. And we can't put our finger on it. You know, we know something in my life is not right. And you can't quite put your finger on it. And even after you've gone through the 12 steps, you still feel like something is not right. And a lot of times people run to the doctor. And the doctor says, well, tell me about it. Maybe it's a little bit of depression. Maybe it's anxiety. But we just know for sure that, you know, something